we're entering some of the darkest times in our nation's history. I'm like, but are we? Like,
oh man, if you ask people over these last few weeks,
I think the darkness has just shifted. Like, it's just changed places.
Okay, ask like somebody like a black person living in the South in the 60s. Like,
if that was
today,
darker,
right? Like, yeah,
I think he might be even spiritually, I guess. The
like,
same is true. Yeah,
you look at, and then you go to like the Civil War. You look at like the terrible things that we're known for with Native Americans, and like, there's been a lot of bad.
I think to be fair, I don't think. I mean, I'm not like, I guess, defending that, but like, I mean, certainly he's aware of that. I think he's being maybe a little like dramatic for the sake of like implication or application.
Yeah, it could be, and it admittedly could be like somewhat biased, because we do see people politically that are like, oh, such and such was elected president. Like, this is the worst day in our nation's history.
This is the most important election of our lifetime. It's like, I guess you could say that about everyone, but once you say it about everyone, then
every generation going back to the beginning of time has thought that like theirs was the most depraved times in the world, and like maybe things kind of ebb and flow, but like the Sodom and Gomorrah were like the perfect biblical example of like depravity, right? And that occurs pretty close to the front of your Bible, unless yours is laid out different than mine. So like there has been the problem of evil since the dawn of time, and it's just like, it's a bad take to think that like we are more evil now than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Turns out people are just evil.
We just figured out different ways to do the bad.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Different and more creative ways to do the bad.
Right.
Yeah, I will say a couple things though. I like the way you put it earlier, where it's like, we do live in a culture that is incredibly postmodern. And so I think narcissism comes across differently, just like you said. Like, people have been narcissistic, sinful people have been narcissistic since Eve ate the fruit, like, and gave it to Adam, who ate the fruit. But I think since we live in such a postmodern culture where it's like anything religious is just silly, then I think it just feels heavier for some believers. And so I think that's kind of what he's getting at. And I think that also infects, especially speaking for like younger generations, like it infects like culture. We talked about this previously, affects theology and and changes the way we can think about certain things. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't agree, but agree that like we live in one of the most narcissistic, just because that's true for nearly all cultures, but it's just maybe looks a little different.
Well, we've made it easier and in a lot of ways glorified narcissism.
That's good. Yeah.
Right?
That's I think a perfect way to look at it. Like what is your truth versus the truth? I think that's a very postmodern Enlightenment type thought, like that there is some reality that is self-determining. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Yeah.
So I just think we should be careful when we're like, oh man, these are like this is the darkest time or the worst time or the like insert thing in our, like, well, let's have some awareness. Like, and I guess the extension of that is, and where it like rankles me a little bit is if you look at the inverse of that, like implying that 40, 50 years ago were better times. It's like, well, again, so go to the 60s and ask black person in Georgia if that was better than it is now.
Yeah.
Or go to somebody in the Civil War in the South and say, hey, is this your time is probably better than, just wait till you get to 2024. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I think perspective maybe is important, because sometimes people will hear that and think, oh, you're right. Like, Trump is president or like whatever, like these are dark days. It's like, well, I don't know, maybe, but there's been plenty darker.
Yeah.
So let's have, I don't know, respect. I guess maybe that's what I'm asking for. It's just like a little bit of respect for the people who have been hurt throughout our nation's history and are still like feeling those wounds today. Like, let's not marginalize that experience.
Yeah.